WFSU-FM now presents a delayed broadcast of the Economic Club of Florida luncheon meeting of November 14th, 2016. This meeting was recorded at the Florida State University Alumni Center in Tallahassee. Now, to introduce the program, here's Economic Club of Florida President Dominic Calabro.
Erik Jacobsen, our speaker, is president of Deseret Ranches, the cattle division for Ag Reserves, and general manager of its flagship cattle operation, Deseret Ranches of Florida. Erik is responsible for the company's cattle operations throughout North America, including ranching and feeding operations. He started working at Deseret Ranches in 1986 as a cattle foreman. Talk about from the ground up. Before leaving Smithfield Foods, where he worked in various management positions, including general manager from 1995 until about 10 years ago, 2006. He returned to Deseret Ranches of Florida as the general manager in 2006. An active member of the Florida cattle industry, Erik served as president of the Florida Cattlemen's Association last year, 2015. Erik also served as Brevard County's Cattlemen's president and in various committees with the National Cattlemen's Association. Erik is a graduate of the University of Florida. Cindy, I know you'd be happy about that, where he earned a Bachelor's of Science in Animal Science, and of Brigham Young University, where he earned a Master's of Business Administration. Originally from Lakeland, Florida, Imperial Polk, P-O-K-E County. My dear friends are from there, including the founders of Publix. Erik and his wife, Renee, have been married since 1990 and have 6 children. Please welcome Erik Jacobsen.
All right. Well, thank you, Dominic. I appreciate the introduction. I want to thank Dave Micah for the invite. He invited me a few months ago and kind of let me pick the date, so it was hard to pass up on it. And then also honored to speak to such a distinguished group. Surprised that you would invite a cowboy to come speak to a group this distinguished, but I appreciate you doing that. So what I want to do today is tell you a little bit about Deseret Ranches, and I want to start out and give you an overview of the ranch, and start out kind of statewide, and then transition into speaking more specifically about the Central Florida Ranch. About midway through my presentation, I want to take a pause and, assuming the technology works, show you a little 6-minute video that we just finished on our stewardship of the ranch. And then talk a little bit about the future and some of the challenges that we have, especially in Central Florida. And then I'll be glad to answer any questions you have. So hopefully this will take a little of the mystery about us out of the equation as I go through this. And I'll try to be pretty open, and like I said, at the end, I'll be glad to try to answer any questions you have. So let's start out with a really broad overview. First, so Deseret Ranches of Florida is a diversified agricultural operation, and we have 2 flagship operations in our portfolio. One is Deseret Cattle and Citrus in Central Florida. We'll talk a little bit about it in a minute. And the other is Deseret Cattle and Timber that we call in North Florida, which we'll talk about in a minute also. The properties are owned by a company called Farmland Reserve Incorporated. I think everybody knows that that's affiliated with the LDS Church. I've heard it called the Mormon Ranch before and whatnot. So I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. And it's operated by a company called Ag Reserves Incorporated. Farmland is a 501c3 corporation that pays property taxes. And Ag Reserves is a subsidiary of Farmland, and it is a for-profit equal opportunity employer. And that's who we all work for. And so it's much like working for any for-profit company. We pay corporate income taxes, all those kind of things. And I know some people have had questions about the tax status of the ranch, but we do pay property taxes and we do pay corporate income taxes. So next, to address the $1 million question. So why does the LDS Church own property? And I'm here to speak on behalf of the ranch. I'm not really here to speak on behalf of the church, so I'm going to let a former president of the church say why. And it's really as simple as this. You can see a statement that he made. He said, "We have felt that good farms over a long period represent a safe investment where the assets of the church may be preserved and enhanced, while at the same time they are available for an agricultural resource to feed people should there come a time of need." And Way back before my time, years ago, the church made a decision that just like it encourages its members, it should put a little money aside every year for a rainy day. And whenever you make a decision like that, you have to decide what you're going to do with that money. And one of the things the church decided to invest in is agricultural property. And agricultural property over the very long term, 50-year time horizons, is a very good investment. It's as solid as an investment in the S&P 500, and it has much less volatility. So for those that have interest in investing for very, very long holds, agricultural property has proven to be a great investment over the years. So let me shift now and talk a little bit about our different flagship operations. And start out in Central Florida, and this is the one I've worked on since back in 1986. Our Central Florida operation is 295,000 acres. It was established back in 1950, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the history. It's interesting. And so we're a long-time landowner in Central Florida. We know the area well. It's a special place to us, and have tried to take very good care of the property over the years. It's located in Osceola, Orange, and Brevard counties, between Orlando and the Space Coast, and it borders the St. Johns River on the east side. So the St. Johns River runs up the east side of the ranch. The headwaters of the St. Johns River actually start on the ranch, on the south end of the ranch. And you can see that we have on our east side, we've got the whole developing Space Coast, and on our west side, we've got Orlando International Airport, Kissimmee, St. Cloud area. So that's created some challenges for us over the years to operate agriculture. I think most of you know we're not developers. I think if we were, we would have done something years ago. But we've owned the property for over 65 years, and other than things being condemned from us and things like that, we've never sold any of it or changed its use in any way. All right, North Florida, our new operation, what we call Deseret Cattle and Timber. So we purchased 380,000 acres. It was acquired in 2014 from the St. Joe Company. It's located in 7 counties. Primarily, as most of you know, it's a planted pine timber operation. It currently produces about 500 semi-loads of timber a week. We will add over time a pasture component to that and cattle to that to flow into our nationwide flow. Got the general manager of that operation here. I saw him somewhere if he raised his hand. Michael Archibald over here in the corner. And so Michael's here with us, and we put together what we think is a really solid management team for that operation, both with a combination of people we brought in from different places, from the Central Florida Ranch and other places in the country, and some former St. Joe employees. So we're excited about that property and look forward to holding it for who knows how long, but we're planning to keep it about as close to forever as you can get. So we look forward to operating that. All right, so what I want to do is shift a little bit now to Central Florida and that operation, or what we call Deseret Cattle and Citrus. So why Florida? Back in the late 1940s, as I mentioned, the church decided to invest money in ag property, and there were 2 people, a guy named Henry D. Moyle and Heber Meeks, that were on assignment in Florida, and they found that Florida had an unusually large number of large tracts of property, most of which were owned by timber companies. They would go in, they'd buy the property, they'd cut the timber off of it, and then they would sell it for $8 or $9 or $10 an acre. And so we ended up in 1950, between 1950 and 1952, the entire 295,000 acres was put together. And for the most part, it was cut over timber ground. The property didn't have, really had, it says few homes, but almost no homes on the property. It was remote, had a few roads that went through it. This is a property that we call a Carroll house. We actually renovated this house. It was built in the 30s. We renovated it in the early 2000s, and we use it as a visitor center now. And so as we have people that come out and they're curious about the ranch and they'd like to have a tour, we have a volunteer couple that live there, and they're able to give tours of the ranch. And believe it or not, we have probably over 1,000 people a year that come through that just out of curiosity to see a little bit about the ranch. So once the property was put together in the 1950s, then we began the process of improving the property. And one thing I wanted you to note on this picture, if you look at it closely, if you look at the dozers, you can see the oak timbers that are bolted to the tracks of the dozer to keep it, to increase the flotation of the dozer. So, a lot of parts of the ranch were fairly sandy like you get up here, but as you get closer to the St. Johns River, you encounter more muck, and so they had to bolt those timbers on it, or the dozers would just sink out of sight. So anyway, after a decades-long project of improving the property, we then began to start a cow herd and start breeding cattle. There's a funny story about a guy that we started buying cattle from a guy named Whiskey John Parton in the St. Cloud area, and the story goes like this. So he sold, say, 4,000 cattle to us, and so we started receiving cattle, and once we got to 4,000, he just kept bringing them, and he kept bringing them, and he kept bringing them, and after about 6,000, we said, how many more are you going to bring us? This was a manager at the time. He said, I don't know. It depends on when you decide to fix your fence. And what happened was that the cattle, when there weren't a lot of fences back then, and so when the cattle were delivered, they just went back to where they came from. So he just kept shipping until eventually somebody figured out what was going on. Anyway, just one of those funny historical stories. So let me shift gears now to what's going on today. And this is Deseret Cattle and Citrus. So Deseret Cattle and Citrus has become one of the premier U.S. cow-calf operations in the country. Cow-calf production, I think a lot of you know, is the first step in really the cattle supply chain. You have ranches that produce a calf each year that'll be weaned and shipped at about 500 pounds. They'll go then to a stocker operation, which is another grass operation, usually in Oklahoma and Texas, which we own some properties in Oklahoma and Texas we send our calves to. They'll go from about 500 to 800 pounds there, and then they'll go to a feed yard, and we own a feed yard in southwest Kansas. And so the cattle basically leave here in September and October at 500 pounds. They go to stocker operations, so back out on grass in Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas, and then they roll into our feed yard in southwest Kansas. And from the feed yard, they go to Cargill Meat Solutions, which is a processor of the beef that we produce. Production today, we run a steady inventory of about 42,500 cows. Those cows produce about 36,000 calves a year. Like I said, they're weaned at about 530 pounds in the month of September. So in the month of August and September, we ship about 36,000 calves out west. So we have quite a few semi-loads going out every day, and it's quite a logistical feat to do it. We retain about 5,100 replacement heifers a year. So a heifer is a female calf, and we have to retain those and maintain our 42,000 head cow herd. Those heifers actually come up to North Florida, to Chiefland and Georgia. They graze irrigated annuals through the winter, and then they come back, and we breed them and go from there. And then we have to maintain a bull herd of about 1,400 head to service those cows to produce the calves. And bulls go in at a certain period of the year for 90 days, and so we calve certain periods of the year for 90 days. So our cattle herd has developed over 65 years. They've been selected for adaptability, for production efficiency, and for marketability. And we utilize what we call a 3-breed rotation. And hopefully this doesn't go too far in the weeds for everybody, but I guess 2 things I want to point out on this. One is we utilize 3 different kinds of cattle. We utilize Brangus, Cimbra, and what we call Deseret Red. Most of the cattle in Florida have Brahman influence in them to make them adaptable to the subtropical climate that we have here. So Brangus is a cross between Angus and Brahman, which most of you probably know. Cimbra is a cross between Simmental and Brahman. And then Deseret Red is an animal that we created, and that's a picture of it there on the wall. And it's a combination of Brahman and other breeds. And this cow's mother actually flew in as an embryo on a jet from Texas. We implanted the embryo in a recep cow, had the calf, and then back crossed it with another breed to produce this animal, and that's how we started that line of cattle for our 3-breed rotation. The thing that's important on a 3-breed rotation, and the reason you do that is you breed Brangus to Cimbra, Cimbra to Deseret Red, and Deseret Red to Brangus, because you get what's called heterosis, and it's a principle in genetics, and the best way I know to describe it in layman's terms is 1 + 1 = 3. And basically when you take 2 diverse genetic bases and mate them together, the offspring will tend to be superior to the parents. And so we utilize that heterosis to try to help improve the performance of our cattle also. So the way we manage 300,000 acres and 42,000 cows is we divide it up into geographic units. And so the ranch is divided up into 14 geographic units. Each unit has a unit manager, 2 cowboys, and about 3,600 cows and about 20,000 acres. So what's unique about the ranch? Number one, I would say, is scale. Today in agriculture, to be competitive, it's just the reality is you have to have scale. People who think otherwise, I think, are a little bit naive about food production. With the scale, we get a high degree of efficiency. Part of the efficiency is process controls that we can put in place. We have operating procedures just like Ford does when they build a truck. We've got operating procedures to help guide what we do on the ranch. And then we're able to get pretty sophisticated in what we do with genetics. We collect phenotypic data actually up here in Marianna. University of Florida has a bull test station that we test our bulls in. But we also collect genomic data, and we're able to pull DNA samples and combine the phenotypic data and the genomic data in order to make better decisions on what animals we select for our breeding programs. So to run the ranch, it takes approximately 40 cattlemen or cowboys. Each person has about 1,200 cows, so our cow-to-man ratio or cow-to-person ratio is about 1,200 to 1. So we've learned to be really efficient with labor over the years. Like I mentioned, on a particular unit, geographic area, you've got one one manager and two cowboys, and they work together and they do all the cow work, all the fence maintenance, all the cow pen maintenance on those 3,600 head of cattle, just those 3 guys. Ranching is kind of an eclectic mix of traditional techniques combined with technology. I mean, one time we're out gathering cattle on horseback still, but then we're pulling DNA samples and sending them off to do genomic scans to select our cattle. And so it's really an interesting business, and one of the reasons that I've always loved to be involved in it. Just like I said, still a lot of the work is done on horseback. Just briefly want to cover some of our other operations on the ranch. One is citrus. So we have about 1,600 acres of citrus on the ranch. We also have some citrus in Clewiston and Ruskin, but on the flagship operation, we've got about 1,600. We use precision irrigation like a lot of folks. We did the math and we figured we produce about 20 million glasses of orange juice. And this is an industry that really faces a lot of challenges. I think a lot of you have heard it either directly or indirectly, but we're having challenges with this also. And what we found with greening is this disease that is people refer to as greening, is that if you had really high-performing groves, they're now average, and if you had average groves, they're now really low performers. And we actually have a grove on the ranch that is fairly average, and we reached a point it needed to be recapitalized or replanted. And we're gonna shift out of it and transition that property into cattle production instead of citrus. So it's tough business right now, and there's going to have to be some new thinking, I think, in the industry to really make it move forward. A couple other things we do, we grow some row crops, about 1,200 acres of row crops that we irrigate through the winter so that we can grow in the wintertime. We cut some timber, cypress and pine, and also harvest palm trees, 30,000, 40,000 a year that we just sell in the ornamental markets. We have some sod operations. And then we have a couple of mining operations where we mine fossilized seashells. So this gives the ranch some diversity, which allows us to stay competitive in the ups and downs of the cattle market. As far as community goes, in Central Florida we have about 80 employees plus quite a few contractors, and they're all over the place, from cowboys to agronomists to guys with law degrees that handle our land and governmental affairs to accountants. A lot of them are third generation employees, and frankly, it's a great place to raise kids. I have 6 children, 3 of them are out of the house, and my kids have gone out into life with a good work ethic, and there's something about going to work at 5 in the morning and getting home at 6 that makes your kids turn out to be pretty hard workers, as when they get to do stuff like that in the summertime. So it's been a good place to raise our family. And then in North Florida, we've got 20 employees right now. That'll grow over time. We're going to diversify that business. It won't just be timber. It'll also there'll be a large cattle component to it. And then right now we have quite a few contractors. And really over time, the contractors will shrink some and the full-time employees will increase. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I want to show you, if I can get the technology to work, hold on. I want to show you just a 6-minute video, so if we can catch the lights. And this is one that we just finished, and it's about our environmental stewardship in Central Florida.
Have a look below. Soaring over a sanctuary of wildlife so varied, any place else might be challenged to show this much natural diversity in a single glance. And it doesn't stop here.
We operate in a natural system. Because we're in a natural system, Mother Nature kind of requires you to operate in a way that's sustainable.
Keep your eyes open during this flyover. The land is about to change. And change again. And again. All of this you see, from the cranes and the cattle to the gators and the greenery, all of it resides within the boundaries of a working ranch and agricultural property that coexists with an expansive conservation operation that requires hands-on attention to detail and experts in the field to manage these precious resources in a delicate dance with nature and the ever-driving demands of a working ranch and agricultural concern. In the heart of Florida, East Central Florida to be more precise, at Deseret Cattle and Citrus, sustainability is a way of life. Deseret Cattle and Citrus is located south of Orlando and west of Cape Canaveral, or commonly known as the Space Coast. Here, in the shadow of the occasional rocket launch, farmers, cattlemen, and caretakers of what comes naturally have a diverse body of work to themselves.
This is not something that was just a one-time deal for us. You know, we greatly care for our systems that we have on place. You know, we talk a lot about our cattle operations, our wildlife, and our treatment of our water as a whole. It's a whole and integrated system.
Deseret Cattle and Citrus is owned and operated by Farmland Reserve Incorporated, an investment affiliate of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Founders of the ranch thought it would be wise to develop an enterprise that would be both a good investment and an additional resource to feed people during times of need. After an extensive search, early ranch managers purchased available land in East Central Florida in the early 1950s.
The ranch business is a very unique business. It's kind of a combination of animal science, ecology, soil science, and business. And so I think if you can balance those things, you can make things work. And so far we've made it work for the last 65 years.
Part wildlife habitat, part water reserve, part citrus farm, and part cattle ranch. At nearly 300,000 acres, a simple drive along this quiet country road just off Florida's Highway 192 passes through only the smallest part of what has become one of the largest working cattle ranches in the country.
The weather's a little bit different, but besides that, really, Florida's a really strong cow-calf state, and in the forage production that we're able to do here in the weather cycle is one of the things that allows us to be such a strong state for cattle production.
We run about 45,000 cows, and so it is a big, complex ranch. Agriculture is advancing over the last 30 years. We've made significant production increases. And so we've been able to work with a lot of universities on research experiments, on finding ways to be better in production and how we can be better.
Between farming row crops, harvesting oranges from one of the most robust regions of citrus output in the world, and nurturing grazing lands for herds of cows, producing food that heads for the table from this land requires a lot of space and attention, and with an eye on long-term sustainability. On the ranch, that means taking care of the neighbors that call the ranch home too. More than 350 species of wildlife, including almost 250 species of birds. The ranch runs alongside the St. Johns River for 40 miles. That's just one of the reasons why the ranch created Jug Island, a wetland preserve where stormwater runoff is made cleaner through natural plant filters, while giving birds and animals, many that are endangered elsewhere, a place to nest and flourish, including one of Florida's largest rookeries, where the treasured wood stork is making a stunning comeback from its once endangered status.
Because of the stable production that we have in this rookery here, we're able to help in growing that population and eventually getting them to where they can survive on their own.
I'm a natural resource manager, but I'm a biologist by trade. And the system, the actual act of creating what we did here, there was one benefit in mind, but what the actual true benefits that we had were just exponential. Some of the wintering grounds for the migratory waterfowl that we have here, this is a destination for them.
But it's not just the wildlife that are looking for a home to nest.
I started as a cowboy here and turned into a cattle foreman and then worked with heavy equipment and now I'm working with wildlife, security, and forestry.
We put our life in it. I mean, we treat it like it's ours.
Ranch stewards understand their responsibility to look to the future. Florida's growth as an American state is unique and historically fast-paced, requiring a thoughtful approach to the wise use of natural resources. The ranch is working with local and regional government agencies to take a long-range, generational approach to conservation. Water is an especially precious resource in Central Florida.
This is a 2,000-acre reservoir, really central to the ranch. There are a few things that are really remarkable about this reservoir. First, going back to the history of it, this was a state and federal project, and the ranch, Deseret Ranch, actually going into easements. The ranch, throughout its history, has contributed to really some of these regional water supply projects.
Managers and cowboys know Deseret Cattle and Citrus has a bright future as a working ranch. Their livelihoods depend on the ongoing health of these natural systems.
Generally, when people come out here, they're awed by the beauty of the ranch, by the wildlife that they see, by the vast landscapes. They're surprised that we're in the cattle business in Florida. So as we've formulated plans for the ranch, we've tried to stay focused on their environmental stewardship.
We're going to take care of the environment, we're going to take care of people, and we're going to do as good a job as we can in cattle production, how we handle, how we treat. And so for us, that is the definition of sustainability.
All right, get the lights back on, yeah. So I hope you enjoyed that video. It's something that we just finished, and they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, so I think that's a great way to actually see the ranch without being there. So what I want to do now is talk a little bit about the future, and this is an interesting graphic. This is a picture of Florida at night. So you can see where the population is in Florida, and you can see where our property is. And you can see that it's closing in on Central Florida Ranch. When I say rapidly, I'm talking, 50-year time frame, so to speak. But one of the things that we decided, this is probably about 12 or 15 years ago, is that for the most part, we've just focused on agriculture. We've paid attention to what's going on around us, but not gotten too worried about it. And we've seen the changes in Central Florida from 1950 to now. And then we saw some projections for the future, and we realized that approach wasn't going to work from now till the next 65 years, and that we needed to get a little bit more proactive in planting our property, or somebody else was going to plant it for us. So I guess the first point I want to make about the future is that we'll keep ranching for generations to come, even in Central Florida. It's what we love to do. We're ag people, we're not developers, but we're committed to agriculture. The other, though, is that we realize that our future is tied to the regions. And we looked at the 2050 population projections, and East Central Florida, I think, is projected to go from 3.5, 4 million people up to over 7 million people by 2050. So it is the fastest growing region in the state of Florida. And so we need to deal with that reality. And so what we did about 11 or 12 years ago, we started a process that we called envisioning. And the reason we called it envisioning instead of planning is that it's very, very long-term kind of horizon instead of just trying to plan out. Most people, when they say plan, it's 5 years or 10 years or 15. This was more of a 60, 70-year process. And we tried to build our, I'm going to say the word planning now, around 3 areas. One is deal with the environment, transportation, water use, and land use. And to create some kind of a framework that can be done very, very early on in the process. And so we started out, we began that process of envisioning by developing an environmental framework for the ranch. And this is what we call the North Ranch, which is the 250,000 acre chunk that you saw at the beginning, and then the South Ranch is 50,000 acres to the south. We've not done anything there because we think it won't come under pressure for a long time. But So we started out the envisioning process by developing an environmental framework for the ranch, and it identifies areas that we think should be either in long-term ag or long-term conservation. The area, kind of the tannish area to the east along the St. Johns River, is what we envision being in long-term ag and long-term conservation. The big swath through the middle, the north-south red swath, is what we call a central wetland upland mosaic. And that's the area that we've identified to put in conservation long-term. And then the yellow areas are linkages between the two. The green areas are some of the larger wetlands, and then the other areas are areas that could be developed in the future or could stay in agriculture, either one. And so we developed that framework map to guide the rest of our envisioning activities. The second thing that we did is we participated in and helped facilitate and encouraged this process in Central Florida. And I think this goes back, about 10 years ago now. This regional planning effort called in Central Florida known as How Shall We Grow? And it was kind of an effort of a lot of different entities, and it created a vision, a 2050 vision for the region. They said, do you want to just continue with the sprawl that we've experienced, or do you want to look out a little bit further in the future and try to create a vision for the region? And so what that process did is it did create that 2050 vision, and they centered it around what they call conservation, which kind of fits what we did, countryside, which is ag, which kind of fits, centers, the concept of having centers of development versus just sprawl, and then looking way, way out in advance for corridors. And so it fit with where we thought we needed to go. So at that point, then we shifted into gears and we did two plans, an intermediate plan and a long-range plan. The intermediate plan was in Osceola County. It was originally called the Northeast District. It began back in 2008. And we used the sector planning laws in the state of Florida to do some long-range planning well beyond the normal 10 to 20-year period, like 50-year planning that would have some kind of legal significance that allowed us to plan at a very high level. And so we went to the property that was closest to the areas that are going to come under development pressure, which is that kind of southeast Orlando or Orange County area. It's about 24,000 acres. It'll have a minimum impact on our ag operations. And we went through a sector planning process on that. And then since then that property has been is transitioning into a project called Sunbridge, the Sunbridge Master Plan. One of the other things that our owner, the church, invested in is commercial real estate. And there's a company within, a sister company that we have to the ag company called SLR, Suburban Land Reserve, and it manages commercial real estate. And so when we have a property that gets to the point that it's going to transition from ag to commercial, we actually sell that internally to SLR, we call it, and then they work out some kind of an arrangement with the developer. In this case, they worked out an arrangement with a developer named Tavistock. A lot of you are probably familiar with them. They developed a Lake Nona project near the airport. And this is a 30-plus year project, and over time, that property will be developed into this Sunbridge project. So when we went through the sector planning process, we knew that this is stuff that was intermediate term, 30 to 40-year kind of stuff. We also wanted to do some things to put some kind of a framework to protect the main body of the ranch out beyond 30 years, to 65 years. And so we did what is now been completed. It's called the North Ranch Sector Plan. And it's on the main body of our property in Osceola County. It's this area in blue. It's 133,000 acres. It's a very long-term landscape level plan that addresses environment, transportation, land use, and water. And it is designed to put some protections on that property to prevent it from piecemeal development in the future. And I'm talking like way out, like 40, 50, 60 years from now, and to identify, what would be appropriate to develop if it was developed, what should stay in long-term ag, what should be protected environmentally, and where major transportation corridors should go. And it's designed to be an activity post-Sunbridge. This is a little bit closer look at the plan itself. You see the light green areas and the dark green areas are conservation areas and long-term ag. You can see the linkages. And then it incorporates a transportation plan that was developed by this group. About 3 years ago, the governor issued an executive order creating the East Central Florida Corridor Planning Task Force. That task force went through a process. I was a member of the task force to identify very long-term corridors for East Central Florida. When that process was done, you can see the ones that were identified, by the task force, both existing and new, on that by the shaded gray areas and some of the darker kind of gold areas. We incorporated those recommendations then into the sector plan, and so the sector plan addresses the environment. It addresses what future land uses could be done. It identifies long-term transportation corridors, and also addresses a water issue there. So it was a long-term planning effort. I guess the thing that I want to emphasize is that it's not our effort to rush out and develop this property, but it is our effort to protect it from getting nitpicked to death over the years. And in the past, we've had counties come out and condemn areas for landfills. We've had counties come out and say, well, there's a big old green space out there. Let's go take water off of that. And we've had counties try to condemn their way in to take water out of the Taylor Creek Reservoir, which is the reservoir that you see up there. And so it became obvious to us that if we didn't put a framework in place to protect the ranch long term, that it was just going to get nicked and nickeled and dimed and nibbled around the edges for the next 50 years. And with the pressure of the growth in the area, we felt like if we didn't do some planning, somebody else was going to plan it for us. And this sector plan has been approved by the state. It's been approved by the county. It is in place now, and we feel like it affords some good protections on the property long term. And it provides some guidance. So it's actually, things are planned at a landscape level versus one little piece at a time to prevent any kind of piecemeal development in the future. If it ever was developed, it would be done by smaller plans that had to be in compliance with this big picture plan long term. And just to give you a perspective, the ranch is about the size of Seminole County, so it would be like being able to go into the county and say, this is where the environmental grounds are going to be, this is where the major transportation corridors are going to be, this is where the long-term ag is going to be. Okay, now start doing your planning based on that. So it's kind of a unique situation. We think it'll do some good things long term. So bottom line, this is my last slide. First of all, we care about these places and we're committed to good stewardship. We all love the ranch, we care about it. We're just going to take good care of it. And if that means having to do some planning, then we're going to put on our hats and do the planning, and then we'll take them back off and start running cattle again like we just recently did. We're committed to agriculture long term. We think agriculture has a great future. You've heard about there's 9 billion people in the world to feed, between now and 20-something. And we think agriculture has a good future, and so we're committed to ag, and that's what we're excited about it. But we have developed long-term plans for the Central Florida Ranch to try to deal with the realities of what's going to happen in Central Florida over the next 65 years. But we've done it way, way, way in advance so that when and if it does come, we'll be prepared for it. So with that said, I appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little bit about Deseret Ranches, and hope you enjoyed the video and enjoyed the presentation. I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Erik, that was excellent. First question from our former chairman, Erik.
That was a great presentation. I really appreciate
thank you.
Coming today. Who are your current customer groups, and how do you see the future demand for your agricultural products nationally and internationally?
Okay, that's a good question. So the question about our current customer base and what do we see as future demands. I'll start out, and cattle is obviously our core business. And so what we've done with cattle is we've kind of bought our way up the supply chain. We've gone out west and we've bought stocker operations in Texas and Oklahoma. We've got a feed yard in southwest Kansas. And then we have other ranching operations in Nebraska, Wyoming, Montana, Utah, southern Alberta, Canada, and a few other locations that all feed into that central program. And what we've tried to do then is build an integrated system, and then we've negotiated an agreement directly with Cargill. If some of you may have heard of Cargill, a big ag firm, and they are developing product, or a product, I guess you'd call it, called pasture-crafted beef. And we're going to be the exclusive supplier for that product. They're going to be the exclusive offerer of that product. And so eventually you'll see in the grocery stores this pasture-crafted beef product. Cargill it'll be a name that they own, but it'll be a product that we supply. And so that's kind of how we've tried to address that, is to try to differentiate ourselves from others. On citrus, we've tried to stick with some of the bigger label, the Minute Maids and the Tropicanas and whatnot. And frankly, we're trying to sort through where we're going with citrus in the future. So does that answer?
What are your plans for your panhandle property?
Plans for the Panhandle property. So we plan to continue to operate the Panhandle property agriculturally for the foreseeable future. And, we'll manage it like we have the Central Florida operation. We'll try to do a very good job at it, be good stewards of the property. It'll continue to be a major timber operation for the foreseeable future, but there will be areas where the plantation pines are that as we go in and cut the pines rather than replant, we'll convert some to pasture. And we're going to try to end up with kind of a mosaic of pasture, forested areas, wetlands, of course, and other uplands, and create a more diverse program there with cattle and citrus. We hope to eventually take that up to about a 30,000+ head cattle operation.
Don't you have a number of acres for sale on the eastern end?
Yeah, we do. So when we bought the property from St. Joe, there's kind of a core area on the east side of east of Panama City and kind of in between Panama City and the river. And there are some outlying properties, up towards Tallahassee and other areas that most of which we probably will sell. By the time we're done, we should be right at about instead of 380,000 acres, we'll be at like 310,000 acres. Yes, ma'am.
I was a little confused when you were talking about protecting the property and the county's actions. Are you saying that the counties have exercised eminent domain?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we had Brevard County came in and condemned 3,000 acres from us a number of years ago, put a landfill. And we've had other counties come in and try to condemn. Well, you saw the space shuttle go off, right? So the steam from that is off the ranch. And years ago, I'd say in the early 70s, the city of Cocoa came out and they condemned a series of 1-acre plots of ground across the north end of the ranch. And then they got consumptive use permits, put in a well on each one of those properties. And now they pump about 28 million gallons of water off the ranch, 28 million gallons a day off the ranch, and it supplies all the water along the Space Coast from Satellite Beach up to Cocoa. And so we've had a lot of things like that happen over the years. And so by putting these plans in place, it becomes really difficult for people to do stuff like that.
Bob Sanchez?
Yes, sir.
The other major landfill around there is Disney World.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about the relationship between Disney and Deseret.
Okay. The relationship between Disney and Deseret, it's not, we don't do a lot with Disney. Back in the early days, we knew them, and, we had some communication. When they built Animal Kingdom, they came out, and there's certain varieties of grasses that we have on the ranch that they got some and, planted those for Animal Kingdom. We communicate with them periodically, but really don't do that much with them anymore at this point. I think Disney owns, about 20,000 acres or so.
Did they acquire the land from Deseret?
No, they didn't acquire the land from Deseret. It's interesting. I get these little excerpts of history, and there was a guy that came out to take a tour of the ranch, and his father was this Meeks fellow. And he had some journal entries from this Meeks, and I think it may have been Moyle, but it said, this was like back in the 60s, and I think it was in the 60s. Anyway, there was a journal entry, met a guy in Orlando named Disney, showed him around the area, And so anyway, so I don't know, maybe there was some influence there, but we've never traded any property that I'm aware of. They're quite a bit west of us.
Bill Gunn?
Yeah.
One of the spokesmen on in your video stated that there was a collaboration with the universities.
Yes.
Deseret.
Yes.
Have you maxed out on that, or?
No, we do a lot with, mainly with University of Florida, obviously, because it's a land grant organization. But we do a lot of stuff with UF still. mainly with a research station in Ona, a little bit up here in Mariana. Well, a lot with Mariana now that we own the property up here. But yeah, I do a lot personally with them, and did a lot when I was president of Cattlemen's to try to get money for them to rebuild some stuff that they needed to rebuild in their animal science groups. And but we do a lot of work with them, either at the research station or they do tests on Deseret. So we work with the university quite a bit. Yes, sir.
With the discussion about the EPA and their overreach with farmers and agriculture, how's your relationship been with the EPA and as far as monitoring your operation?
You know, we have, I'd say generally we have had a really good relationship with water management districts and with the state. I don't know that we've had to deal, or with DEP here in the state, I don't know that we've had to deal a lot directly with EPA. There's obviously some concern about that, especially up here in North Florida with the Corps and where, you know, how they're going to define their jurisdiction, so to speak. But I would say it's good. Usually in the state of Florida, we don't have to deal directly with the EPA that much. We mainly go through DEP, and you know, it's our relationship with DEP's been up and down over the years, but most of the time it's good. I'd say it's very good right now. So.
John.
On behalf
Yes, sir.
of the Gadsden County
Yes, sir.
Cattlemen's Association, we appreciate your presentation. Question: the National Beef Cattlemen's organization has been a proponent of the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement.
Yes.
What is your opinion about the impact that might not go through now on the beef cattle industry?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll go through. So the TPP, they call it, I think would have a really positive impact on the beef industry, and you know, I think the other agricultural commodities have also agreed that it would be positive. I don't know about all the other industries in the United States, but it would level the playing field for us in Japan. Right now there are a lot of tariffs in Japan, I think like 32% tariff on American beef, and Australian beef is 8% or something like that. And so what it does is it ramps us down and puts us at par with Australia. And you know, it's actually a very important agreement for the beef industry in the United States. I don't know if it's going to fly or not, but you know, beef consumption in the U.S. is fairly stable at this point, so we still have a competitive advantage in the United States around the world in agricultural production, and so most of our growth is going to be export driven. So the TPP, anything that will help drive exports is positive for the beef industry in the United States. So I actually went out with the National Cattlemen's Association. We went around and tried to lobby our legislators around here to vote for it, and they were really, really skittish about it because they knew that Trump was not for it, and they didn't know what was going to happen. This was back, you know, before the election happened. So I don't know where it's going to go now.
Mary?
I'll let you pick. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
This was a fascinating presentation.
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate all the people who made this happen. Is there any chance that at some point there's a number we can call to arrange a field trip? I mean, this is just a fascinating area. And when you talk about university involvement, when you talk about the positive strategies that you're using to look to the future to make it good for everyone, I just have a sense that another spin-off of your marvelous stewardship could be letting other people have a chance who are in key legislative government and just people like this group.
Yeah, we give two kinds of tours at the ranch. So we give ones to the general public, and all you have to do is go to DeseretRanchFlorida.com. If you just type in Deseret Ranch Florida, most of the time that pops up. So you go there, and there's a phone number that you call to schedule a tour, and it's actually a retired volunteer couple that give the tour. We have a script for them. They don't always stick with it exactly, you know. They kind of go off on tangents, and I'm like, please stick with the script. But anyway, we have a little visitor center that you can look at, you know, that Carroll house or that house I showed you on the picture. They show you around in there, and then we have a little tour bus. They take you on a little tour. If it's an ag group, or if it was like a group of legislators that got together and wanted a tour, then I'll either handle that personally or one of the managers on the ranch will, and we'll give you something a little bit more in depth. But that's how we handle it, because like I said, we have 300 or 400 people a quarter that come out, just wander out or call ahead for a tour. But yeah, anytime you want a tour, all you have to do is call that number and you can schedule it. And yeah.
Chika?
In your presentation, you said the two purposes for the business were investment and food supply in a time of need.
Right.
I'd like to know what constitutes a time of need, who would benefit from the food supply, and do you have a distribution plan in place for that?
Yeah. So you're pulling me over into territory I'm less familiar with, but so yeah, there is a distribution system, and a lot of the profits the company make actually goes. It either goes into reinvestment or it goes into the church's humanitarian efforts. And I think a lot of you have seen, like when we had a hurricane come through Central Florida, you know, at least taking my ranch hat off now and put my church member hat on, you immediately get a call. Hey, people need help on the coast, and you know, within the first weekend we had like, at least over in Cocoa, we had like 600 volunteers or somebody that showed up, and they dispatched out, you know, a lot of different work orders, and we went and we cleaned up people's houses, and basically we had the church members taken care of in a day. So after that, we just did whoever needed help. And a lot of what the church does is like that. And so there's a lot of behind the scenes humanitarian effort that happens as you see different disasters happen around the world. And you know, frankly, they're usually one of the first there and pretty well organized when they go. And so there's a lot of good that comes out of that. I think the time of need can be driven by generating cash to help in a time of need. And then the other is, of course, food. And there's a whole nother network on the ecclesiastical side called Bishop Storehouses, where basically members of the church fast the first Sunday of every month, and they take what they would have spent on money or on food, and they donate that to the fast offerings of the church. That goes to a network of bishop storehouses that then have commodities, and if somebody is having trouble and they're in a time of need, the local bishop can write a bishop's order for them, and then go get free food and other things that they need. So,
yes.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
With you all being as vertically integrated as you are, I'm not sure how much the price of cattle versus price of beef actually impacts your operations. But for smaller producers, there's a huge difference.
Right.
Are you retaining more heifers now that we've seen the cattle prices come down, but beef prices still at highs? And
right.
What do you kind of see as a forecast going forward when we start to see it come closer together again?
Yeah, it does affect us because we're not in the processing business, and right now the retailers and the processors are making quite a bit of money, and the ranchers are not. But when you look at the big picture, I still think there's going to be a pull on protein worldwide. Part of what's dropping cattle prices right now, and a lot of you probably don't know this as far as that cattle prices are low, but they were really high and now they've gotten really low. The world economy is a little bit weak still. U.S. dollar has gone up in value, which has hurt exports, and so exports have been weaker. And then some of the processors have there's been a few major processing plants in the U.S. that have closed, and so there's less processors chasing after cattle. And so you have an overall decrease in prices, and then you have the packers that basically are being able to maintain higher margins right now. So it does affect us because we're not a packer. As far as where it goes in the future, like I said, we're still bullish on protein long term, and so we think things will correct themselves long term. But I think we may be in for a 2 or 3 year run where it's a little bit rougher, and then hopefully instead of being up here and then down here, hopefully it kind of levels out in the middle. And we do have some of the ups and downs taken out of our system since we own cattle all the way till they're finished. Sometimes the cow-calf group makes a lot and the feeders lose, and sometimes it's the other way around. Since we own both, that kind of levels us out in that regard a little bit. So,
any more questions? Yes.
Thank you for taking the time to speak to us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm Tom Kelly, MBA candidate from Florida A&M. My question is, Osceola County as well as Deseret ranches have come together to develop 155,000 acres. Out of that, 55,000 were reserved to be left untouched in the ensuing decades.
Right.
How is this conservation easement beneficial to both parties?
Yeah, you're referring to the North Ranch Sector Plan, and if you look at, and I can't remember the numbers exactly, but on the North Ranch sector plan, at least initially for that landscape level plan, for that landscape level plan, we identified 50 or 60,000 acres that would be either earmarked as long-term conservation or conservation and ag. And I think the benefit for that is being able to do that at a landscape level up front. And what happens is agreements get put in place between us and the county, and they're actually in place now, that commits us to earmark that property for long-term conservation and ag and to protect it in that state now. And then if and when the property is actually developed, then let's say you have, this is the map and you develop this piece, whatever portion is in that conservation area then gets put into a conservation easement. So it allows you to do it at a landscape level. So instead of developing a piece this big and deciding what's got to be environmental, you look at a piece this big and you can plan environmental set-asides on a landscape level, and then you do the little piece and say, well, that little corner needs to go in a conservation easement. And then you end up with big wildlife corridors and things that connect and things that make sense instead of this piecemeal patchwork that happens over a 50-year period. So.
Yes, last question.
Eric, great presentation.
Thank you.
You guys did a very good job with the sector plan down there in Central Florida.
Thank you.
Thinking about North Florida, and since you're also going to be in timber up here, not just cattle, you've taken over timber operations, do you see a future for the forest products industry in Florida? It's a 10 million acre land use, and you're in that business.
Sure. The timber business is new for us, and it's a pretty cutthroat business from what we can tell right now. But anyway, I think there's a future. It's a good place to grow pine trees. I don't think that that's going to go away. There are a number of pulp mills, timber mills. I think there's a new mill that went in, I think in Lake City or something like that recently, a German company that built it. And so we're not negative at all on the timber business. We'll have a component of timber on the ranch long term. But this property kind of fits into a bigger picture for us. We need additional cattle to flow into the supply chain that we have with Cargill Meat Solutions, and in the north we're going to have a slightly different breeding and calving season so that it fits with the Central Florida operation and creates a wider supply of cattle for us. So I guess the way I'd answer that is we're not negative on timber at all. We're more cattlemen, I guess, and so we're going to have a cattle component to it, but we'll also continue to have a timber component to it long term. So.
Thank you. We're officially adjourned.
You've been listening to a delayed broadcast of the Economic Club of Florida luncheon meeting of November 14th, 2016. This program was recorded at the Florida State University Alumni Center in Tallahassee. Join us again next time for another Economic Club of Florida luncheon meeting on WFSU-FM.